Hey guys, tonight we glide gently over the still waters of Lake Texcoco. Water so calm it mirrors the sky like polished obsidian. You're not dreaming yet, but your feet barely touch the earth because we're not standing on solid ground. We're walking on a floating garden woven from roots anchored by willows and blanketed in vegetables that shimmer with dew and ancient wisdom. You're in the heart of Aztec Tenochtitlan, sometime in the 15th century, and everything beneath you is both impossibly fragile and impossibly alive. Birds wheel overhead, frogs hum like sleepy metronomes, and rows of green stretch out in geometric perfection. This, my friend, is the chinampa, and if you try to build one without knowing what you're doing, you'll be waist deep in muck and losing corn to the ducks by noon. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the sleepy little map we build together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your toes sink into a patch of soft earth that isn't quite land. It moves ever so slightly with the rhythm of the lake below. You glance down. You're standing on a chinampa, an ingenious invention that's part raft, part farm, and all brilliance. The Aztecs didn't just farm the land, they made it. These floating gardens were constructed with astounding care. First, long stakes, often willow branches, were driven deep into the lake bed, outlining a rectangular plot. Then came the weaving reeds branches and brush, tied together to form a loose platform. Next, layers of mud, dredged from the lake mixed with decomposed plants, were spread over this raft until it became a thick, rich bed of soil. And then, like the perfect touch of flourish in a folded napkin, came the trees. Ahuejotes, a species of water-loving willow, were planted at the corners of each chinampa. Their roots anchored the garden in place. Their branches shaded the crops, and their leaves added nutrients to the soil. The result? A farming system that was not only self-sustaining, but mobile, productive, and downright poetic. You take a step forward. The chinampa holds. There's a low creak like the garden is breathing. Birds flit from branch to branch, and in front of you rows of maize wave in the breeze like a crowd at a silent concert. The layout is tidy, efficient, a checkerboard of green bordered by canals wide enough for narrow boats a collie to pass through. These canals were the lifeblood of the city, ferrying produce, flowers, messages, and the occasional curious child. And the best part? These floating gardens could produce multiple harvests a year. Maize beans, squash, amaranth, chilies, tomatoes, all thriving in a patchwork of productivity. It's estimated that 1 acre of chinampa could feed up to 15 people. That means the island city of Tenochtitlan, home to hundreds of thousands, could be fed not just by conquest, but by gardening. Historians still argue whether chinampas were truly floating, or whether they were more like man-made peninsulas, partially attached to the lake bed through sediment buildup and root networks. Either way, the effect was the same from a distance. They looked like emerald rafts drifting across a sea of mirrors. And they weren't just farms. Some chinampas grew flowers for temples and nobles. Some were used for experiments, new combinations of crops, herbal gardens, even color variants for dyes and ritual use. Others were maintained by entire neighborhoods, each one a community project with generations of shared effort tucked into every furrow. You crouch now, running your fingers through the dark soil, It's cool, moist, infinitely giving. The earth here feels generous, and the air is laced with sweet notes of corn squash, blossoms, and lake mist. A dragonfly buzzes by lazily unbothered. You lean back against a willow trunk, feeling the chinampa shift gently beneath you like a sleeping animal. The birds quiet. The sun dips lower, casting golden slashes across the water. In the distance, you hear the splash of a paddle. Somewhere, someone is coming to check their harvest, and you, lucky dreamer, are here to watch it grow. Section 2. You're still reclined beneath that willow tree, watching as the sunlight plays tricks across the lake's surface. A passing boat leaves just enough ripple to remind you that everything beneath your feet is suspended above water, not by magic, though it might as well be, but by the patient genius of people who turned a swamp into a city. Now, take a few slow steps across the chinampa. It doesn't wobble the way a raft might. It holds steady, like a living extension of the lake itself. The entire garden feels woven like a tightly knit sweater made of mud and roots and determination. Before you now, an open canal stretches between you and the next chinampa. Picture it, one rectangle of green, followed by another and another, neatly stacked like pages in a quiet book. It's a mud brick mosaic, and at its heart lies the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, a city so vast, so carefully structured, it made the Spanish chroniclers question whether they had stumbled into a dream. You board a narrow canoe, the wood smooth and cool beneath your fingers. It glides easily, barely disturbing the water. As you paddle between the gardens, you pass other boats, one piled high with squash blossoms, another full of marigolds, and one with 3 sleepy dogs, balanced like royalty atop a crate of herbs. It's all surprisingly quiet. Birdsong, paddle splash, the soft rustle of wind through maize. As you drift through these man-made lanes, you begin to notice just how intricately the system is designed. Each chinampa is separated by canals, but all are connected through a vast, almost city-like network paths of water, intersecting like roads, bridges of reeds or planks at every other corner. These weren't just gardens, they were neighborhoods. Historians still argue about the exact size of the chinampa system. Some say there were over 90,000 acres of these gardens, stretching through the Valley of Mexico. Others believe that number might be inflated by awe and poetic license. But either way, the scale is staggering. And here's the thing, this wasn't just practical, it was beautiful. Aztec gardening was as much about aesthetics as survival. You can see it in the symmetry, the way each plot is aligned with the next, the way trees are spaced like columns in a living cathedral. Even the canals reflect the sky so perfectly that it feels like you're drifting through both earth and heavens at once. You pass by a plot thick with amaranth, its bright red plumes swaying like feathers. Another garden is bursting with chili peppers, their colors sharp enough to make your eyes water before they touch your tongue. There are coriander tomatillos, and even a small patch of wild tobacco, probably used for ceremonies rather than lunch. But what truly stands out is the care. Someone has just harvested maize here, neatly bundled stalks stacked at the edge of the garden. The soil is tilled into perfect rows, not a leaf out of place. The ditches at the edge of the plot are free of debris. Every plant looks like it's been spoken to kindly. You step out of your canoe onto another plot. It feels like walking into a living mural, each color arranged for balance, each scent layered like notes in a quiet song. Nearby, a group of gardeners draped in light cotton and wide-brimmed straw hats work with tools so simple they feel timeless. Wooden spades, clay pots, a digging stick called an uitstli, shaped like a question mark and worn smooth by centuries of use. One woman adjusts the placement of small stones near a squash plant, not for irrigation, not for decoration, but because she says the plant leans better when it has someone to lean on. You chuckle softly. Of course it does. There's no rush here, no machines humming in the background, just the rhythmic scrape of tools, the occasional joke passed between workers, and the sound of corn leaves whispering secrets to the wind. It's easy to forget you're in a city, because beneath the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan, there was a calm logic, an order not imposed, but invited. You glance toward the horizon now, where the great Templo Mayor rises above the rooftops, like a mountain dressed in white. From here, the temple looks distant, dreamlike, as though it's part of the same mythology that breathes through these gardens. And yet you're standing in it, in the myth, in the soil, in the system that fed a city, balanced its lakes, soothed its gods, and grew its people, all on a platform of woven roots and dreams. Section 3. You settle now into a patch of filtered shade where a stalk of maize towers over you, its broad green leaves fluttering like ribbons in a silent breeze. The chinampa beneath you sways almost imperceptibly, not enough to disturb your balance, but just enough to remind you that this is not fixed land. You are floating, and somehow you're still being fed, because tonight you're learning how the Aztecs grew corn without really trying. At least that's how it seems. Maize, or tlaxcali, wasn't just a crop to the Aztecs. It was the life giver, the sacred sustainer. More than just food, it was embedded in origin stories, rituals, daily meals, and even the afterlife. You didn't grow maize, you worked with it. Gently, carefully, sometimes prayerfully. You kneel beside a row now, noticing the spacing. Each plant is about a foot apart, perfectly staggered. No fancy rows, no chemical fertilizers, just precision, born of centuries of watching what the soil wanted. Here on the chinampas maize could grow faster, taller, and more abundantly than on standard plots. Why? Because of the continuous nutrients fed by lake sediment. The Aztecs dredged the bottom of canals and spread the muck like dark chocolate frosting across the garden beds. This thick, mineral-rich mud acted like natural compost, forever refreshing, forever moist. It was a perfect system. Plants didn't dry out, roots didn't suffocate, and weeds, fewer than you'd think, thanks to the shade provided by the spacing of crops and the clever rotation of companion plants. You hear it now, a soft flutter in the leaves, like whispers, like lullabies told by the stalks to the sky. This isn't just farming, it's floral diplomacy. The Aztecs also had their tools. Nothing with motors or blades, just hand-carved digging sticks, woven reed baskets, and flat ceramic scoops. You watch one now, an old farmer with arms like sun-baked driftwood. Stoop low, press a stick into the earth, with the rhythm of someone who could do this blindfolded, and drop a seed in with a flick. No grand gestures, just intimacy. He stands, stretches, and you catch a glimpse of the Kalpuli tattoo on his forearm, a mark of his neighborhood clan, a reminder that this garden isn't his alone. It's shared, like air, like water, like wisdom passed between generations, folded gently like an offering. Historians still debate just how productive these chinampas were. Some claim up to 7 harvests per year. Others suggest that's exaggerated, may be possible only in ideal years or with certain crops. But all agree chinampa maize wasn't average. It was spectacular, not only because it was abundant, but because it was resilient. There were over 200 varieties of corn cultivated across Mesoamerica: short stalks, tall stalks, sweet blue, red speckled, and the Aztecs knew how to pair each one with the precise plot it liked best. Like a sommelier with soil preferences, this wasn't trial and error gardening. This was carefully curated agriculture that bordered on botanical matchmaking. And then there were the festivals. The growing of maize was punctuated with celebrations, sometimes tied to the harvest, sometimes to the planting, and sometimes to gods like Centeotl, the maize deity who was both nurturing and moody. Offerings were left at the edge of chinampas, bundles of tamales, drops of pulque, or small garlands made of maize silk. It was all part of the conversation between people and plant. You lean closer to a stalk and pluck a kernel from a fresh ear. It's soft golden and somehow glows a little in the late sun. The plant seems unbothered. It's made to give. And you understand now this wasn't a fluke. It was a result of observation ritual and a kind of gardening that didn't just aim to produce food, but to live in relationship with it. You picture it now before dawn, a young gardener stepping barefoot onto a chinampa basket in hand, whispering morning greetings, to each row nudging a few leaves back into place, scooping mud from the canal, and adding just enough water, not too much to keep the soil sighing in satisfaction. No machines, no overcorrections, just a rhythm, a conversation, a 1,000-year trust. And it worked. The corn grew tall, the people thrived, the empire expanded, and all of it, every meal, every offering, every carefully packed boat of maize, began right here, on a floating square of mud, stitched together with willows and love. Section 4. You've barely finished marveling at the rows of golden corn when something curious catches your eye. Twisting tendrils of green, snaking around the base of each maize stalk, like gentle vines wrapping a friendly tree. You lean in, and there they are, beans curling upward with quiet confidence, clinging to their taller sibling for support. And nestled below them, a thick carpet of broad leaves, squash sprawling out, like lazy sunbathers, their blossoms yawning open to the sky. This trio isn't an accident, it's a deliberate dance. You've just stumbled upon the ancient technique of companion planting the three sisters in action, though the Aztecs had their own names and variations. Maize beans and squash planted together in a sacred, synergistic embrace. The corn provides the ladder, straight and tall, guiding the beans skyward. The beans return the favor by fixing nitrogen in the soil, feeding the maize from the ground up. And the squash, she shades the soil with her broad leaves, locking in moisture and blocking weeds with the kind of quiet efficiency only a plant could achieve. It's more than clever. It's genius in soft green form. You sit at the edge of the chinampa, now legs dangling over the canal like a sleepy heron. The roots of the three sisters tangle invisibly beneath you, forming a web of generosity. Nothing here grows alone. It's a chorus, a braided lullaby, You begin to notice subtle details. The bean pods are different shades, some pale green, others with mottled purple stripes. The squash leaves have faint silver veining. Every plant feels like it was selected not just for food, but for texture, beauty, even personality. Aztec gardeners didn't just plant crops, they crafted relationships between them. And it didn't stop at the three sisters. Between rows of squash, you find marigolds, their orange blooms glowing like embers. They aren't food, they're guardians, natural pest deterrents, keeping unwanted insects at bay while adding color to the garden, like a painter flicking fire onto canvas. Historians still argue over how systematized these combinations were. Did Aztec farmers follow strict planting charts? Or was it all passed down through song, through gesture, from grandmother to child, hand to hand? Some believe garden knowledge was encoded in oral myths, gods who taught which crops liked which neighbor's spirits, that punished bad pairings, dream visions where a squash would scold you for planting it too close to garlic. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise you, because this garden feels alive in more ways than one. You run your hand over the soil again. It's warm, soft, textured like bread dough just before the final rise. No mulch, no synthetic fertilizer, just lake muck, decomposing plant matter and time. You spot a few other pairings as well. Tomatoes and chilies, tucked in a plot of raised earth bordered by water canals. Their heat complements each other, not only in taste, but in growth. One warms the tongue, the other the soil. There's a patch of kaya, a leafy green that must be cooked before eating, but adds iron and a bit of legend to the mix. Near it, purslane, a plant that most modern gardeners call a weed, but the Aztecs knew as a crunchy source of omega-3. You squint. Wait, is that avocado in the back corner? Yes, and papaya too. You feel like you're walking through a dream version of a farmer's market, one designed not by algorithms or yield per acre formulas, but by intuition. Nothing is overgrown. Nothing is neglected. It's all in conversation. You pass another gardener, this one older, his gray hair tied back with a piece of embroidered cloth. He hums while he works. Not a song you recognize, probably a family melody, a planting chant, passed down like a recipe. He gestures to the squash and smiles. She likes to feel her sisters near her, he says softly. You nod. Of course she does. Because the Aztecs didn't just build a system of agriculture, they nurtured a living network, a collaboration between plants, people, and soil, each part supporting the other, each success whispered across generations. And in this garden, floating, fragrant, and softly shimmering, you feel that wisdom pressing gently into your skin, the kind that says, grow together or not at all. Section 5. You are tracing your fingertips through the soil now. Well, what feels like soil? But technically, you're petting a cocktail of lake muck, decomposed weeds, ground up kitchen scraps, and something that might have once been a frog. And strangely, it smells lovely. This is the Aztec version of Miracle Grow, and it doesn't come in a bottle. It's sacred sludge. And tonight, you're learning the messy, mushy art of how the Aztecs fed their floating gardens. Because you can't just plop a chinampa on a lake and call it a day. That fertile layer of dirt, it needs constant attention. And the Aztecs' masters of quiet innovation didn't just work with the land, they reinvented it. The main ingredient, lacustrine sediment. It's a soft, silty mud dredged from the bottom of canals, a murky mix of minerals, decayed organic matter, fish poop, and heaven knows what else, collected in baskets or with wooden scoops. This black gold was spread over the chinampas in thin layers, enriching the soil with every application. You imagine the rhythm of it. Now paddle into the canal scoop, a few baskets of sludge, return to your chinampa, and gently pour it onto your crops like the most unsanitary blessing imaginable. Not glamorous, but incredibly effective. This muck was nutrient dense, full of nitrogen, phosphorus, and microorganisms that danced invisibly beneath the maize and squash. And because the canals ran like veins around every garden, the Aztecs had a never-ending supply of natural fertilizer just one paddle away. But they didn't stop at mud. You notice a compost pile near one chinampa's edge, not a towering heap of eggshells and regrets, but a neat arrangement of decomposing corn husks, flower stems, leftover tamales, perhaps dropped by a distracted boatman, and fish bones. Aztecs were early adopters of organic composting, adding household scraps and field refuse back into the garden to close the loop. And if you think they stopped at banana peels, think again. They also used human waste collected in carefully maintained containers, then processed and returned to the earth once fully decomposed. It sounds gross, but the principle was simple. Nothing wasted, not even the unpleasant stuff, especially not the unpleasant stuff. Historians still debate how widespread this particular practice was. Some argue it was mostly reserved for ceremonial gardens or state-run farms. Others believe it was a common practice in wealthier households who could afford the collection systems. What's certain is that Aztec soil was alive constantly, replenished, constantly observed. You poke the earth again and realize that even the texture is special, slightly spongy but firm. It holds moisture without drowning the roots. It crumbles without drying to dust, a balance that modern gardeners would sell their mulch for. And here's a curious trick. Between plantings, Aztecs would cover sections of the chinampa with water hyacinths or other aquatic plants. These helped shade the soil, retain moisture, and added nutrients when chopped up and mixed into the next round of sediment. You imagine yourself now on a small raft, harvesting plants with one hand and dragging a rake with the other, a basket of lake mud balanced behind you like a soggy crown. You're tired, yes, but the earth thanks you. The corn straightens, the squash glows, and perhaps most impressive, the system was so balanced that chemical fertilizers weren't needed, ever. The Aztecs managed to grow enough to feed a vast city. Tenochtitlan's population rivaled that of Paris and Constantinople at the time, using only lake muck fish bones, compost, and patience. You wander past another garden now, where someone has just sprinkled a fresh layer of sediment between beanstalks. A few ducks waddle nearby, quacking at the injustice of not being offered snacks. They too contribute through droppings, through pest control, and through sheer cuteness. And for a moment, the garden breathes. You can almost hear the roots drinking. The chinampa beneath you seems to sigh in contentment. It's a system that works because it's closed, self-renewing, in conversation with the water, the sky, the waste, and the wonder. Nothing escapes. Nothing is wasted. Everything circles back in a kind of ecological prayer. And you, lucky wanderer, get to float gently through it all, marveling not at the mess, but at the magic that comes when mud becomes nourishment and sludge becomes sacred. Section 6. You wander deeper now into the gardens, not just physical spaces, but temporal ones, woven with memory myth and celestial choreography. It's not just about growing food, it's about growing at the right time, in the right way, under the right sky, with the right offerings. Because Aztec gardening wasn't just ecological, it was cosmic. You step into a chinampa that feels different. The plants are more spaced out. There's an altar at the center, small and carved with spirals and stars. Around it grow maize beans and marigolds, but also copal trees, used not for food, but for incense. This garden isn't just for eating, it's for observing, honoring, and aligning. Aztec agriculture operated on a ritual calendar where planting was scheduled not by season alone, but by the position of stars, the movement of the sun, and the rhythms of Tonalpohualli, the sacred 260-day calendar. Each day had a name, a symbol, a deity. Each field had its preferred planting time, and each crop its own guardian god. A young farmer once whispered to the maize before planting, not out of superstition, but because they believed Centeotl, the maize god, might be watching, or listening, or adjusting your harvest depending on your attitude. Historians still argue whether every chinampa had its own altar, or if these sacred gardens were reserved for priests and temple workers. Some believe farmers built miniature shrines from clay and feathers tucked between the stalks. Others say the offerings were symbolic: a twist of grass, a clay bowl of lake water, a few drops of pulque. But whatever the size the intention was, clear farming wasn't just a craft. It was conversation with the cosmos. You look up now. The sun is slightly eastward, dipping into gold, and next to the altar is a stone gnomon, a simple tool that casts a shadow used to mark planting days and solstices. It's not ornate, just precise, humble, a farmer's sundial. You place your hand over it, warm from the day, cool underneath. It feels like holding the pulse of the garden itself. Around the altar, ceremonial plants bloom. Sempoalxochitl, the Aztec marigold, vibrant and soft, used in both farming and funerals. Its scent is sharp, earthy, holy. Next to it grows chiate seeds, valued not just for nutrition, but for sacred drinks used in rituals. You catch a breeze. Carried on it is the faint scent of copal smoke, drifting from a neighboring garden. You can't see the ceremony, but you feel it. Something is being blessed. A planting, a harvest, a marriage between chinampa and family. Whatever it is, it's soft and slow. Sacred doesn't need an audience. You crouch near a plot of amaranth, its crimson plumes catching light like beer. It was used in both food and festivals, baked into cakes, shaped like gods. The Spanish would later ban it, afraid of its power in rituals. But here now it stands proud, bending only slightly in the breeze as if bowing to the sky. You begin to sense that every plant here has two lives, the practical and the poetic. One to feed the body, one to feed the soul. The Aztecs believed that gardening aligned them with the order of the universe, that by tending to the soil, they were reenacting creation itself, stabilizing the world with their hands. Not just farming then, balancing the cosmos. It sounds lofty, but here in the hush of willow trees and damp soil, it makes sense. Everything feels deliberate, nothing rushed. You spot another marker near the water's edge, a flat stone carved with symbols, likely used to record planting intervals, lunar cycles, and the timing of Silonian's feast, the festival of young corn. During that event, first ears were wrapped in cloth and offered like newborns, then eaten with reverence. A farmer nearby folds his arms and closes his eyes, not napping, praying maybe, or just listening to the corn whispering again. The wind picks up, and you hear a gentle clatter seed rattles hung from a low branch, swaying with each breeze. Their purpose is unclear, decoration, sound, charm, or just a gardener's lullaby. You lean against the altar stone, now eyes growing heavy, skin warmed by the last blush of sun. Around you, the chinampa glows gold and green. The plants don't shout their divinity, they breathe it. And in this moment, with your hands in sacred soil and your breath in sync with swaying corn, you realize this was never just about growing food. It was about growing in rhythm with the stars. Section 7. The breeze shifts slightly now, curling through the narrow canal beside your chinampa. You watch as the water laps against the edge of the garden, not with menace, but with a kind of lazy affection. The chinampa holds. It always does. But why? You glance again at the corners of your little floating world, and there they stand. 4 ahuejotes, those tall, thin, slightly ghostly willow trees, their roots laced deep into the sediment, their branches always swaying, like they're sharing a joke the wind forgot to deliver. If chinampas are the body, the ahuejote trees are the bones. These unsung heroes were planted deliberately along the perimeters of each floating bed, their purpose to stabilize. Their roots dig down into the lake bed, weaving through the woven reed foundations of the chinampa, anchoring the whole plot in place like nature's rebar. You rest your hand against one of them now. Its bark is soft-ridged and slightly damp. It smells like water and memory. You can almost feel its heartbeat slow and deep. These aren't ornamental trees. These are guardians. They're also wonderfully cooperative. Unlike many trees that throw tantrums, when flooded, the ahuejote thrives in wet soil. It drinks deeply from the lake and gives back shade protection, and even materials its branches were used to repair fences, reinforce platforms, or build small rafts. Historians still argue about how early the Aztecs began using ahuejotes in chinampa construction. Some believe the idea came from earlier Mesoamerican cultures who experimented with wetland farming. Others claim it was a local innovation, a flash of brilliance born from watching how native plants survived lake life better than imported ones. Either way, these trees became essential infrastructure. You look around now and realize that nearly every chinampa has them. Some stand in proud rows. Others lean into the breeze, like they've been here too long. A few have birds nesting in their upper limbs, egrets maybe, or something sleepier. You pass a gardener leaning against one tree's trunk, chewing something, perhaps a bit of salted squash. He points to the ahuejote and smiles. She holds the edge, he says. Without her, we all float away. You nod. You've seen it now. The roots hold the soil in place. The branches provide scaffolding for vines. The leaves fall and feed the garden. It's not just a tree. It's a teammate. And yet the tree doesn't demand attention. It just stands, quiet, helpful, like someone who always shows up with snacks but never makes a fuss. You sit again beneath the canopy of one. The shade cools the soil Your breathing slows. Insects hum above the water's surface, and the entire chinampa sways just slightly with the breeze. But it doesn't shift. The ahuejotes are holding strong. In some gardens, the trees are also symbolic, tied to the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, each marked by a living pillar. Some even had ribbons tied to them, colored cloth, flapping in the breeze to show the changing season, or to honor the planting moon. In the rain, the ahuejote bends, never breaks. It knows the value of flexibility. You think that's a good lesson, one worth folding into your own thoughts. A boat floats by low, loaded with herbs and flower garlands. The pilot paddles slowly, offering the occasional wave. On the edges of his raft, you notice little saplings, baby ahuejotes, bound in soft netting, their roots soaking in lake water as they're ferried to their new homes. The cycle continues. A chinampa is planted, a corner softens, a tree is added, the plot steadies, and another generation grows beneath its branches. You close your eyes for a moment, hearing the leaves whisper overhead, and imagine what it must feel like to be one of those trees, planted at the edge of a world, always touching water, always holding. The thought is comforting, like a promise the lake made to the earth. I won't take it, not while she's standing here. And so you rest now, gently leaned against the bark of the quietest hero of the garden, one who never needed applause, only roots. Section 8. The sun stretches long now across the water, and the gardens around you begin to rustle, not with people, but with creatures. Small, deliberate lives flutter, waddle, slither, and buzz between the plants, like living punctuation marks in this sleepy sentence of soil and water. Because Aztec gardening didn't just invite plants to the party, it welcomed animals too. You sit still watching as a duck waddles confidently through the squash patch, pecking occasionally at invisible things. It's not an intruder. It's a guest, a regular, possibly even an employee. Ducks were allowed and encouraged in chinampas, not because they were cute though, that helps, but because they ate pests, fertilized the soil, and required exactly zero supervision. A roaming duck would nibble on insects, drop nutrient-rich surprises behind it, and move on without complaint. You imagine the job listing now: wanted pest control expert with waddling experience, must enjoy long walks, soggy feet, and the occasional startled grasshopper. Not far away, a snake glides between beanstalks, slow and smooth, like a whispered thread through a green loom. It's probably a non-venomous milk snake, the kind farmers left alone, or even quietly protected, because snakes kept the rodent population in check, slithering silently through the gardens, asking for nothing but sun and a few meals. Historians still debate the extent to which animals were invited versus merely tolerated. Some argue that ducks, frogs, turtles, and snakes became semi-domesticated by habit, drawn by the easy food and cool water. Others believe Aztec gardeners intentionally encouraged biodiversity, creating an early model of permaculture. Either way, the relationship was mutual, beneficial, no fences, no cages, just soft agreements made between species that shared the same space. You notice a dragonfly now hovering over the canal. Its wings shimmer, catching sunlight like stained glass. It dips low, lands briefly on a chili plant, then darts off. You swear it winked, Further along, a low, cooing sound draws your attention to a group of turkeys scratching gently near the edge of a chinampa. They're not wild, but they're not exactly pets either. They're garden companions, kept for meat feathers and the occasional comic relief. Near a cluster of tomato plants, a gardener scatters bits of crushed maize along the dirt path, not for the plants, but for the ants. She tells you, without stopping her task, that the ants will carry it off, cleaning the undergrowth and disturbing no one in the process. Another arrangement, another ancient handshake. You begin to realize that these gardens weren't quiet because they were empty. They were quiet because they were in balance. Each creature had a role, a rhythm, a niche carved gently into the garden's daily flow. Frogs chirped near the canal edges. Fish stirred the water eating larvae. Even certain birds were tolerated for their seed-spreading habits. And not all the helpers had feathers or scales. You catch a glimpse of a beetle, glossy black, darting beneath the leaves, probably a pollinator, or a decomposer, or both. You offer a lazy salute. Carry on, little gardener. The Aztecs didn't see gardens as human-only domains. They saw them as shared spaces where every buzzing, quacking, coiled, or winged participant earned its keep. No pesticides, no fences, just trust and a bit of respectful cohabitation. You lie back now, resting on the warm soil, your head cushioned by a leafy squash vine. The sounds of the chinampa are soft and alive. A splash of flutter, the occasional squeak. It reminds you of a very old orchestra, one that doesn't rehearse, doesn't perform, just plays quietly for itself. And for you, the trees sway gently above. A duck waddles by again, this time glancing in your direction like it expects applause. You nod solemnly. Good job, duck. You close your eyes, the edge of your nap wrapped in sunlight and birdsong, because this is more than a garden. It's a living village tucked beneath lilies and maize held together with vines and paws and beaks. And in this gentle web of shared survival, every rustle is a reminder you're not alone out here. Section 9. You drift along now in a shallow canoe, pushed gently by a long pole wielded by a quiet, sun-hatted farmer. The air is rich with the scent of crushed herbs, sweet maize, and something floral, something that's not just edible, but beautiful. As you round a bend in the canal, the chinampas transform before your eyes, no longer just gardens of vegetables and ritual plants. These floating islands burst into color. Bright clusters of marigolds, dahlias, bougainvillea, and tempoalxochitl bloom in manicured rows, their petals whispering in the breeze, like gossiping nobles at a festival. You blink in disbelief because this isn't a field. This is a market garden, and you've just entered the world of Aztec floral commerce. The Aztecs didn't grow flowers just to admire them. They grew them to trade. Tenochtitlan's floating markets, particularly at Xochimilco and Tlatelolco, weren't just for tamales and obsidian knives. They were filled with bundles of blossoms, each tied carefully with straw or reed, sold by the boatload, and floated in from all directions. You imagine it now, dozens of flower-laden canoes, drifting toward market, bright as parade floats, petals falling like confetti in the wake of a paddle stroke. And the demand was real. Flowers were essential for rituals, medicine, perfume, and offerings. They decorated temples and homes, were woven into hair and wrapped around statues. Some were even ground into powders, for ceremonial face paint or tucked into steaming baths as soft little blessings. You pass a chinampa now, devoted entirely to floriculture. It smells better than a bakery. The gardener here isn't carrying a digging stick. She's using a small obsidian knife to trim blooms with surgical precision. Each cut is clean, confident, and quietly reverent. Historians still argue whether flower farming was as lucrative as food farming. Some say it was more elite, a luxury crop. Others believe it was deeply communal, with neighborhoods specializing in specific plants, passed down through family lines. Either way, flower gardens weren't just pretty, they were profitable and competitive. You overhear two gardeners joking about flower piracy, where overzealous canoeists were rumored to snip the best blossoms from rival chinampas under cover of early morning mist. You chuckle at the image of floral bandits escaping with garlands between their teeth. Not all flower theft was malicious, though. Some blooms were borrowed as gestures of flirtation, tucked behind an ear, or tossed onto a raft like a floating love letter. Your guide gestures toward a narrow canal that leads into a shady alcove. There, stacked carefully in a boat, are flower bundles arranged by color, fragrance, and bloom time. Some are destined for temple offerings, others for noble households where priests and royalty expected fresh arrangements daily. It's quiet work, this floral farming. Delicate, but it speaks volumes about what the Aztecs valued: balance, beauty, abundance. You look again at the rows of color. There's no disorder, no overgrowth. Everything is aligned, even the wildest vines guided along string and stick supports. You sense the same sacred geometry here as in the maize fields, the same discipline in softness. And here's something else. In some records, it said that each day of the Aztec calendar had associated colors and plants. Flower farmers would adjust their crops to bloom in sync with specific festivals' oracles in petals. Certain colors were reserved for gods, others for warriors, some for the dead. You pause near a marigold plot. Its scent is sharp and clean, almost citrus. These aren't flowers for birthdays. These are guides believed to help spirits find their way home during Mikulhuitantli, the feast for the dead. You reach out to touch one gently, and it tilts into your hand like it was waiting for you. There's something else in the air now, a sound. You listen. It's singing. From deeper in the canal, a group of women chant softly as they braid flowers into long necklaces, Xochiquetzali, named for the goddess of beauty and fertility. The melody is simple, repetitive, and soothing. It blends with the swish of water, the hum of insects, and the rustle of the reeds. You let your eyes close for a moment. You smell flowers. You hear the boat bump gently against a dock, and you understand this wasn't just commerce. It was culture blooming, a world where flowers weren't just for looking, they were for living. Section 10. The singing fades into the breeze now, and your boat glides forward again, leaving a trail of scattered petals behind you on the mirrored water. You float past the last of the flower gardens, and suddenly things shift, not in color, but in energy. Here, the chinampas look different. They're more structured. The paths are straighter, the rows are tighter, and the people working them more numerous, more synchronized, almost like a crew rehearsing a quiet ballet. This isn't a family plot. This is communal farming, and you've entered the domain of civic agriculture, a place where gardening wasn't just livelihood, but duty. The Aztec Empire didn't leave food production to chance. In a society where feast days came every other week and tens of thousands of mouths needed feeding, gardening was a shared responsibility, written into law, tracked by officials, and celebrated with parades. You watch now as a group of men and women, backs bent in mirrored arcs, work their way across a maize patch. They move in rows, each person following the one in front, spacing the seeds with practiced precision. There's no shouting, no chaos, just rhythm. These people are part of the Calpuli, the neighborhood units that formed the backbone of Aztec society. Each Calpuli maintained its own chinampas temples, schools, and markets, and every member, from child to elder, had a role to play in the maintenance of its gardens. Your guide tells you softly, to grow food is to grow community, and it shows. Children help carry compost in baskets. Elders trim back the flower beds. Middle-aged farmers tend the canals. It's not forced labor, it's cultural choreography, and everyone knows the steps. Even festivals were tied to these plots. During certain harvest feasts, entire neighborhoods would gather on their chinampas for dancing, feasting, and the ritual first cutting of maize. There were drums, there was singing, and there was probably some light complaining about squash yields, because even sacred agriculture comes with seasonal drama. Historians still discuss how much of this work was voluntary versus organized by the state. Some claim certain chinampas were assigned as tribute plots, meaning their yield went directly to the emperor or temples. Others believe the work was rotated like a chore wheel, but with more mud and less grumbling. You watch now as a priest in clean white robes steps onto one of the communal plots. He's not here to work. He's here to bless. He sprinkles water from a gourd over the soil, then touches a small clay bowl to the ground, an offering a prayer, a performance with real consequence, because these chinampas didn't just feed the people, they fed the machine of empire. Tributes of maize beans and squash were delivered regularly to the Tlatoani, the ruler of the empire. These foods stocked palace kitchens, fed armies, and sustained great building projects. And behind every bite, a patch of soil, a calpuli, 100 hands. You hop from your boat onto a platform where women are weaving baskets to carry vegetables to market. The baskets are shaped to fit snugly into canoes, so no wasted space, no tumbling produce, no excuses. They work quickly, laughing softly. One child brings over a squash as big as his head and nearly topples with pride. Gardening here isn't just sacred or scientific, it's social. Everyone knows whose plot is whose flowers always bloom first, who has the best pumpkins, who regrettably lets their chilies overripe. There's gossip, there's teasing, there's also deep interdependence, because when one chinampa floods, the neighbors lend extra seedlings. When someone falls ill, others help tend their plot, not out of obligation, but because the food must grow. Your guide leads you past a mural painted on the side of a small storage hut. It shows a woman with an ear of corn in one hand and a snake in the other, symbols of life power and the balance between sustenance and danger. Beneath her rows of chinampas stretch out like ripples. You pause. The image is beautiful, bold lines, earthy tones, a quiet reminder. This is not just farming. This is civic identity folded into each corn kernel, woven into every basket, painted on every wall. And as you climb back into your boat, paddling slowly through the maze of green and blue, you can't help but admire the wisdom of it all. The Aztecs didn't separate daily life from agriculture. They rooted their cities in it, and from those roots, they built a civilization that floated and flourished. Section 11. You're drifting again now, but this time not through canals of maize or marigolds. No, you've wandered into a chinampa that hums with a different kind of energy, a patch of earth alive, not just with food, but with fashion and flair. Here, the gardeners bend over their work with tools that look stylish. Their tunics are dyed in subtle, earthy hues. Their belts hold beautifully worn digging sticks. One woman has a hat made from reeds, angled just so casting a shadow that says, "Yes, I farm, but I also look good doing it." Welcome to the world of Aztec garden fashion and tool chic, where function meets flourish, and even the muddiest worker carries a kind of grace. Let's start with the tools. The most essential, the uitstli, or digging stick. You watch a gardener now, pressing its curved end into the soil, levering it back like a soft crowbar. It doesn't look like much, just a long, smooth stick, sometimes carved with glyphs or personal marks. But in skilled hands, it's everything. One tool to till, plant, dig, stir compost, and even fend off a goose with opinions. Some uitstli were made of wood, others tipped with obsidian, for those who liked a little drama with their soil work. The handles often wrapped with leather or cord, softening the grip during long days of repetitive planting. And while most were practical, a few were downright ceremonial, carved with symbols of rain gods or fertility deities, passed down like heirlooms. Historians still argue whether every farmer customized their tool or if decoration was reserved for higher status garden managers. But here in this moment, you spot several uniquely marked digging sticks lined up like prized violins against a tree. Each one is cared for. Each one speaks of its owner. And what about the outfits? Aztec gardeners didn't wear armor or capes, but they had their own brand of agricultural elegance. Men often wore maxtlatl, a kind of loincloth secured with a sash ideal for warm weather and muddy tasks. Over it, a lightweight tilmatli, or cloak, which could be tied back when hauling baskets or dipped in water to cool off in the sun. Women favored the huipil, a tunic-style dress made of cotton or megue fiber, sometimes plain, sometimes embroidered with plant motifs, corn stalks, beans flowers, stitched in looping thread that caught the light with every bend and sway. You pass a woman now, with red embroidery spiraling down her sleeves, perhaps symbolic of Tonantzin, the Earth Mother. She notices you admiring it and smiles, clearly proud of her handiwork. Their feet are mostly bare, but a few wear sandals woven from plant fiber, reinforced at the toe for digging. Functional, quiet, garden-tested, and let's not overlook the hats. Wide-brimmed reed hats were common, but some took it further, adding feathers, bits of dyed cloth, even woven symbols, not because they had to, because they could. One gardener nearby has a sunflower tucked into his headband. You suspect it's more romantic than practical. You settle beneath a shady ahuejote and take in the view. Sweat glistens on foreheads. Fabric shifts in the breeze, and tools flash in the sun like quiet promises. The whole scene looks like a runway from a very earthy fashion week, where compost and couture coexist. It all adds up to something you hadn't quite realized until now. Even in a garden, dignity mattered. How you wore your tool, how you folded your cloak, how your hat curved in the light. These weren't trivial details. They were expressions of pride, of personal narrative, woven into the soil and stitched into sleeves. The Aztecs didn't believe utility and beauty had to live separately. They believed you could dig with grace and sow with style. And here among corn leaves and canal breezes, they did just that. You close your eyes now, imagining your own huipil, probably with little embroidered chili peppers, maybe a squash blossom or two. Your tool would be carved with stars. You'd fit right in, because when the work is sacred, the clothes can be too. Section 12. The chinampa beneath your feet narrows into a smaller path, now more experimental than cultivated. The plants here are less uniform, the rows a bit wild. It's not messy, it's curious. This is where the gardeners come to try things, where rules soften and recipes begin. Welcome to the edge of Aztec agriculture, the place of botanical experiments and flavor inventions. You crouch beside a plot of unfamiliar plants. One has thin, pale leaves that shimmer faintly in the sun. Another is squat, bushy, and smells faintly of mint and pepper. A third is prickly, too prickly, and clearly not thrilled to see you. These aren't your average squash and maize beds. They're test plots, places where curious farmers pushed the boundaries of what could grow and what could heal season or surprise. You meet a woman here with hands stained from hibiscus petals. She offers you a pinch of dried leaves to sniff. Sharp, astringent, beautiful. She tells you they use it for fever and sometimes for flavor. Aztec gardening wasn't just about food. It was about balance, body, mind, and soul, which meant every garden had its share of medicinal herbs, secret flavorings, and peculiar little projects that might one day become tomato salsa. Yes, tomatoes. The Aztecs didn't just grow them. They named them tomatl in Nahuatl and categorized them by size, color, taste, and use. Some were sweet, some were acidic, some were better raw, some were best roasted with chiles until your ears tingled. They did the same with chilies, dozens of varieties, each one treated like a distinct personality. There were long, slender ones for sauces, short, squat ones for drying, bright red ones for the ceremonial meals, and green ones for everyday life. You spot a gardener plucking a cluster of pasilla chilies, gently pressing them to check their ripeness. His hand moves automatically. This is muscle memory, not guesswork. Near him, a clay bowl holds an assortment of seeds, some labeled with shell markers, others grouped by color. You suspect this is where crossbreeding experiments happen. Who says you can't chase a better flavor with a bit of patient observation? Historians still argue how scientific Aztec experimentation really was. Some believe it was purely intuitive trial and error passed through generations. Others suggest it was highly systematic, based on calendrical observations, moon phases, and field journals, though written more in glyphs and memory than ink and charts. But here's what no one disputes. The Aztecs were culinary chemists. From epazote, a fragrant herb that adds depth to beans and is rumored to prevent well-digestive drama, to chaya, a leafy green that must be cooked to neutralize toxins but delivers potent nutrients, to amaranth, a plant that's both cereal grain and spiritual icon, used in rituals and roasted into snacks that would still be popular at farmers markets today. These gardens are filled with tinkering, with intention, with tastes born of testing. You sit beside a patch of purslane, once dismissed as a weed, now grown deliberately for its lemony crunch and medicinal bite. You nibble a leaf, tart, surprising, like biting into the middle of a sentence. You pass plots with plants, not yet in full bloom. Some are tagged with stone markers etched with small sun symbols, signs perhaps that these herbs will be harvested at dawn, or only under specific moons. Then there are the flavors, not grown, but fermented. The Aztecs brewed a mildly alcoholic drink from fermented agave sap called pulque. Some added herbs or flowers to infuse it. Others claimed you could influence the dream you'd have that night, depending on which blossoms you steeped in the brew. Whether or not that's true, well, you kind of wanted to try it. In a garden corner, a woman crushes roasted pumpkin seeds with chilies and herbs in a molcajete, a stone mortar and pestle that looks like it could. Stories. The paste smells rich, nutty spicy. She says it's for sauce, maybe a gift, maybe a ritual, and you realize this Inhuecar garden is a kitchen whispering to itself, a place where flavors are coaxed, tested, blended, where medicine and seasoning hold hands, where the border between science and supper is blurred like steam rising from a stone pot. You lie back, letting the smells drift across your face. Coriander, roasted chile, crushed avocado leaves, and close your eyes just for a moment. This is where cuisine begins, not in the palace, but here, in the dirt, in the dream, in a chinampa filled with curiosity. Section 13. As the sun softens into a molten gold above the lake, your boat slows to a near stop, drifting into a quiet chinampa that seems almost untouched. No lines of corn, no clipped marigolds, just winding paths of moss, slow-moving vines, and carvings tucked into tree trunks. The silence here feels thicker, older. You've arrived in a garden of dreams, myths, and metaphors. This isn't where the Aztecs came to farm. This is where they came to remember. You step onto the soft earth, and the first thing you see is a stone sculpture, not large but heavy with story. It's a stylized maize god, carved with ribs that look like corn husks, and a head blooming with flowers instead of hair. This isn't decoration, it's language. The Aztecs believed gardens were alive with meaning, not just places of labor, but canvases of cosmology. To walk through a garden like this was to walk through a poem written in plants. You trail your fingers across the bark of a tree where someone long ago carved a single spiral, not a symbol of possession, a symbol of time, of breath, of cyclical return. Nearby, two flowering bushes lean toward each other, almost touching. A gardener tells you in hushed tones they represent Xochitl and Huitzilin lovers from legend. She a noble woman, he a humble warrior. When he died, she mourned at his grave until the gods transformed her into a blossom and him into a hummingbird destined to chase her petals forever. Their story is planted here, living, blooming again and again. Historians still debate how widespread these mythic gardens were. Some believe they were elite projects crafted by priests and poets for meditative rituals. Others argue they were tucked into every corner of the city Small plots of symbolic growth where flowers meant love struggle, resurrection, or resistance. What's certain is that language and landscape were tightly braided in Aztec culture. Even their word for poetry in Xochitl, in Cuixatl, literally meant flower and song. You step deeper into the garden, and you begin to notice this entire place is a poem. That climbing vine curling around the willow, it's meant to symbolize life rising toward the sun. That cluster of white flowers growing from dark soil, a metaphor for light from grief, for finding beauty even in the compost of sorrow. One gardener waves you over to a clearing where stones are arranged in a spiral surrounding a single cactus in bloom. This, she says, is the dream of Tenochtitlan. You know the story. It was a vision, the sign the Mexicapa people waited for. An eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. It came to them at last on an island in Lake Texcoco, and they built a city there. It began with a myth in a garden, and it became an empire. And so the spiral of stones isn't random. It's a prayer, a map made of metaphors inviting you to remember how every towering temple started with one bloom on an island. You pass a low bench near a canal overgrown with vines. In its cracks, someone tucked dried herbs, offerings maybe, or remnants of an old ritual where a family said goodbye to a loved one or hello to a child. In Aztec belief, the garden wasn't separate from birth or death. It was woven into both. You sit for a moment, letting your eyes take in the scene. This isn't a place of productivity. It's a place of presence, where time is folded like petals and stories root into soil. Even the water reflects slower here. You pick up a fallen blossom red with a golden center and turn it over in your hand. Its scent is subtle, earthy, the kind that lingers in your clothes for days after. A man nearby leaning against a tree sings softly in Nahuatl. You don't understand the words, but you feel the rhythm. It's not performance, it's remembrance. You realize now that Aztec gardens didn't just grow food or medicine or flowers. They grew meaning. They held poems, ghosts, prayers whispered into leaves. And here, in this hushed place of symbols and blossoms, you understand some gardens feed the stomach, others feed the soul. Section 14. The evening air folds gently around your shoulders, now cooler than before, like a silk shawl dipped in moonlight. You drift once more through the Chinampa canals, and something strikes you even after all this time, after conquests and collapses, invasions and asphalt. Some of these gardens are still here. You're gliding toward the survivors, now the chinampas, that refuse to disappear. Most people think of the Aztecs as vanished, a people swallowed by history. But as your boat drifts into the waters of Xochimilco, just outside modern-day Mexico City, you see the truth. Not all empires vanish. Some of them root, and some keep growing. Around you, chinampas still stretch across the water, green rectangles, floating like memories. They aren't as many as before. The city has grown loud and heavy, but here, in this patch of still water, the past is living quietly. A man paddles past with his son in a small canoe. Their boat carries crates of herbs, squash blossoms, and tiny lettuces, tucked like secrets in baskets of woven reed. They nod as they pass. You nod back, because you know now you're not just watching a farm. You're watching a legacy. These chinampas have survived more than 4 centuries of upheaval. Spanish conquest, colonial rule, industrial expansion, urban sprawl, and yet somehow they held on, not because of luck, but because of adaptation. Historians still argue whether these chinampas are direct descendants of pre-Columbian plots or reconstructions inspired by them. Some say they were reimagined during the colonial era with European crops added in. Others insist a few have been in continuous use since before Cortés ever saw a cactus. But regardless of the specifics, the design is unmistakable. Willows still stand at the corners. Ducks still quack softly between squash plants. Marigolds still bloom near the altar stones. And the people tending them, some are farmers, some are botanists, some are families reclaiming heritage, one plant at a time. You reach the edge of one active chinampa, where rows of kale and spinach grow beside amaranth and maize. Modern meets ancient. A solar panel leans against a tree, and a weathered huitzli rests in the soil nearby. The farmer here wears jeans, but her hands moved just like the gardeners you saw in your drifting dream. Of Tenochtitlan, she pulls weeds gently, listens to the wind, adjusts the slope of the soil with a practiced flick of the wrist. She doesn't speak at first, just works. Then she glances up and says, "They're stubborn, these gardens. They remember what they were." You nod. You believe her. In recent years, some have called for the restoration of chinampas, for food security, for clean water, for cultural renewal, and because they work, they cool the air, they feed the people, they teach patience, and in a world spinning faster than ever, they whisper a lesson: slow down, plant something, let it float. You pass another plot, this one tended by teenagers from a local school. They're laughing awkwardly, shoveling compost, trying to figure out which end of a digging stick is which. Their teacher gestures to the ahuejotes, explains the nitrogen cycle, points out the spiraling pattern in a squash blossom. They don't know it yet, but they're carrying a thread tied back to ancestors, to songs to gods, who wore petal crowns and maize necklaces. Some chinampas have even become sites of ecological research. A few have installed experimental filtration systems using aquatic plants. Others test heirloom seeds, Tlaxcala maize, Chilhuacle chilies, Huauzontle, trying to reclaim flavors forgotten under centuries of fast food and fertilizer. You watch the sun slip behind a hill, casting everything in bronze and ink. The gardens shimmer, still alive, still feeding someone, still remembering. And as you drift away, the willow trees whisper in the wind behind you. Not farewell. But we're still here. Section 15. The sky above the chinampas is a velvet hush, now scattered with early stars. The gardens below those floating, breathing mosaics of green and gold begin to fold into shadow. The ducks quiet. The breeze softens. You drift to the edge of one last chinampa where the plants are arranged, not for profit, not for ritual, but for remembrance. You step gently onto the soil, still warm from the sun, and settle beside a cluster of night-blooming flowers, soft-petaled and luminous, like lanterns left burning in the dark. This final garden isn't about growing things. It's about reflecting. You close your eyes for a moment and let everything settle. The knowledge, the rhythm, the quiet genius beneath your feet. because now you understand what made the Aztec gardens extraordinary. Not just their productivity, not just their elegance, but their ability to balance everything: growth and decay, ritual and science, myth and muck. They weren't just farming, they were listening to the lake, the moon, the roots, the seasons, to each other. And in that listening, they discovered things modern life sometimes forgets: that soil can be sacred, that ducks make great co-workers, that you don't need machines to build an empire, just willow trees and clever hands. You remember the woman with the flower embroidery on her huipil, gently sowing seeds while singing, the man blessing the corners of his chinampa with river water, the teenager fumbling with a digging stick, laughing because he just stepped into the canal. You remember the tools carved and worn smooth by generations, the fabrics embroidered not for display but for duty, the plots arranged like verses in a sacred poem. You even remember the snakes, somewhat fondly, and all of it. That whole floating world rested not on technology, not on wealth, but on a very old, very gentle kind of brilliance. Observe, adjust, grow, repeat. Historians still argue whether the chinampas were humanity's most sustainable agricultural system. Some cite the yields, others point to the community. A few speak of the spiritual resonance embedded in the process. But you've walked it now. You've knelt in its dirt, dipped your fingers into its lake, folded yourself into its rhythm. You don't need to argue. You just know. And as you lie back one last time, beneath the swaying ahuejotes, the moon high, the water still, you think, there are empires carved in stone. And there are empires that float. And maybe the floating ones last longer. Wind down, final 300 words. Let everything slow now. Picture yourself reclining on a soft chinampa, the soil gentle beneath your back, the air cool on your face. The water around you laps quietly, steady and slow like a lullaby told in ripples. Above the willow trees, lean in their branches, moving in tune with your breath. You're safe here. You're not in a city. You're not in the past. You're floating in something timeless, a garden that knows how to wait, how to grow without rushing, how to hold everything without holding on too tightly. Breathe in. Let the rhythm of the chinampa fill your chest. Let the scent of earth and maize and night flowers settle over your skin like a warm blanket. There's no task left, no question to answer, only this quiet balance between water and root. Breathe out. Feel the weight of the day sink gently into the soil, disappearing like a seed, waiting for rain. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your eyes drift closed. There's nothing else you need to carry tonight. Only this floating moment. Only this gentle wisdom. Let it rock you. Let it hold you. Let it fold you into stillness. Sleep now. The garden will keep growing, even when you don't see it, even as you dream.